The first thing I noticed about hollow pines was the silence. Not the kind of silence that follows a snowfall, soft and comforting, but a hollow, almost unnatural quiet that pressed against my ears and settled deep in my chest. The town appeared on the map as any ordinary small New England town might. Narrow streets lined with snow-dusted houses, a main street adorned with faded holiday lights, and a church steeple rising above the rooftops. Yet, when I arrived, lugging my suitcase through the knee-deep snow, I realized something was off. No smoke drifted from chimneys. No children's laughter rang from the streets or windows. Even the cars were absent, leaving the roads empty and glistening under the dim glow of the street lamps. I had come to Hollow Pines to spend Christmas with distant relatives I barely knew, yet the moment I stepped out of the cab, a creeping dread began to unfurl within me. The wind carried a cold that seemed alive, whispering unintelligible words through the bare branches. The first house I reached was modest, its wooden siding worn and gray, the paint peeling from decades of neglect. A faint smell of wood smoke hinted at life inside, though it was almost imperceptible. I knocked, waiting for a response, and was met with the eerie sound of echoing footsteps from within. The door creaked open slowly, though no one appeared. I stepped inside, the warmth of the fire inside doing little to chase away the chill that clung to my skin and bones. Inside, the house was a strange mixture of familiarity and decay. A dinner table was set, but the food looked stale, as though it had been left untouched for years. And in the fireplace, the flames burned, yet the heat was cold, as if the fire was a mockery of warmth. I could feel it then, the sense that time here moved differently, slowed, as though the town itself existed in a perpetual state of twilight, never reaching the true light of morning. It was only when I explored the rest of the town the next morning, or what should have been morning, that the full extent of the horror became apparent. I awoke, expecting sunlight filtering through the windows, the normal sense of a new day, but the sky was the same as the night before, dark, overcast, a sickly gray but never brightened. Every house, every street corner seemed frozen in anticipation, waiting for something that would never come. Hollow Pines did not have mornings. It did not have the dawn. It existed in an eternal liminal space, caught between night and day, between celebration and despair. And as I lay awake in the cold, dim room provided by my relatives, I realized that I might never escape, for Hollow Pines did not let go of its visitors, and every tick of that frozen clock promised that I would soon join the hollow-eyed residents, forever trapped in the town where Christmas morning never comes. The following day in Hollow Pines, or whatever passage of time it was, felt longer than the one before. The sky remained a bruised, leaden gray, refusing to lighten, refusing to shift toward morning. I wandered the streets in a growing state of unease, noticing more details that did not belong in a normal town. Street lamps flickered, their light inconsistent, bending and warping like waves of heat over asphalt, yet the cold never lessened. Snow continued to fall in slow, deliberate drifts, undisturbed by footsteps, as if the very ground had ceased to record time. I attempted to talk to the townspeople, hoping for a clue, some explanation for this never-ending night, but the figures were strange. Their movements were jerky, almost mechanical, like the actors in a play reading lines they had long forgotten. I called out to a woman carrying a basket of groceries. She stopped, turned toward me, and smiled, her lips moving, but no sound came out. Her eyes were dark pits, reflecting none of the warmth or curiosity that human eyes usually carry. When I stepped closer, she dissolved. Not physically, but like smoke caught in a breeze, leaving nothing but the faintest echo of a jingle bell on her wrist. Panic began to settle in, but alongside it came a morbid curiosity. I needed to understand. Hollow Pines was not just a town, it was a trap, and whatever supernatural force governed it, it had rules. I realized that the clock tower at the center of town was the key. Its hands were still frozen at 11:57, taunting me, holding the town in a liminal moment forever before the hour could strike. I approached the base of the tower and examined the massive door at its foundation. The wood was old, warped, impossibly cold to the touch, and yet it vibrated as though it was alive. I found a small inscription carved into the wood, almost hidden beneath layers of frost. "The hour never comes, but the waiting is eternal. The bell tolls for none, yet all are bound." I shivered, my mind struggling to comprehend the meaning. I did not want to be bound. I wanted to leave, to escape, but every street I attempted led me back here. The town's layout had changed overnight. Roads twisted into unfamiliar angles, alleys appeared where none existed before, and the houses shifted subtly, their windows facing in impossible directions. Hollow Pines was a living labyrinth, a supernatural construct designed to trap anyone who entered, and I was beginning to understand that I was not the first to arrive, nor would I be the last. By the time I returned to the square, night had thickened, pressing down like a wet, suffocating blanket. A cold wind rose, swirling the snow into small whirlwinds that moved in patterns too deliberate to be natural. Then I saw it, the shadow, a figure that did not belong to any of the mechanical townspeople, moving in the darkness at the edge of my vision. I turned, and the figure vanished, leaving only the impression that it had been close and yet impossibly far. Its presence was oppressive, a psychic weight that pressed on my skull and tightened around my chest. I ran toward the inn where I had been staying, desperate for shelter, for understanding, for any semblance of normalcy. But the streets themselves seemed to resist me. Houses grew taller, shadows lengthened, and the snow beneath my boots thickened with each step. I stumbled repeatedly, as if the town were trying to slow me down, to tire me, to prepare me for whatever force ruled this place. When I finally reached the inn, the front door was gone. In its place was a blank wall, smooth and seamless, unbroken by any opening. I pounded on the wall, screaming, and the sound echoed unnaturally, bouncing back in distorted tones that seemed to mock me. Then the shadow appeared again, closer this time, and I saw it fully. It was not human, though it bore a vaguely humanoid shape, elongated and shrouded in black, its edges fraying into smoke-like tendrils that slithered across the snow. Its face was featureless, yet I could feel it looking into me, reading my thoughts, cataloging my fears. I stumbled backward, and the shadow dissipated, leaving a whisper carried on the wind. "You will remain. They all remain." Trembling, I realized that the town itself was aware, alive, a sentient entity that fed on the liminality of time. Christmas morning never came because Hollow Pines was cursed, suspended forever in the eve, and eternal twilight, a feast of anticipation that would never satisfy. And those who entered were drawn into its cycle, their consciousness tethered to the town, eventually becoming part of its machinery of horror. The evening, or what the town called evening, brought a new horror. As I wandered back toward the inn, I noticed figures emerging from the shadows, familiar yet impossible. Children, laughing, playing in the snow, their faces pale, their eyes wide with wonder. At first, I thought they might be echoes of happier times, ghostly apparitions of Christmases past, but the longer I watched, the more I understood. They were trapped, forced to reenact moments of joy that would never culminate in mourning, in gift-giving, in celebration. Their laughter was hollow, a looped sound with no origin, no conclusion. One of the children approached me, holding a toy soldier frozen in mid-wave. Its mouth opened, producing a faint mechanical sound, but no words. Its eyes met mine, empty yet accusing, as if I had brought this curse upon them. I tried to back away, but the street had shifted again, guiding me inexorably toward the square, toward the clock tower. Hollow Pines was alive, and it wanted me where it could see me, where it could consume my attention, my awareness, my very self. I tried to break the pattern, to step off the streets, to find an exit, but every door, every alley, every passage led back to the tower. Its hands remained frozen at 11:57, yet I could feel the supernatural pulse of the town sinking to it, as if the very heartbeat of Hollow Pines emanated from that clock. I realized then that time here did not exist in the way I knew it. Moments were stretched, condensed, looped infinitely, and the town's sentient nature ensured that escape was impossible. Desperation gripped me, but alongside it came a realization. The town did not merely trap the body, it trapped the mind. The longer I stayed, the more I felt my memories warp, the edges of my identity fraying. Shadows whispered my name, twisted my thoughts, and presented visions of people I loved, calling me to step closer, promising warmth and comfort, only to vanish when I reached them. I understood then that Hollow Pines fed not flesh alone, but on hope, on anticipation, on the human yearning for normalcy and light. By the time I returned to the inn, or what I remembered as the inn, night had deepened to a blackness that was almost liquid. The figures of the town now moved more aggressively, circling me, rehearsing the endless Christmas Eve. I felt their collective awareness pressing in, a psychic weight that threatened to collapse my mind entirely. The clock tower loomed above me, impossibly tall, its frozen hands taunting me. Every instinct screamed that I should leave, that I should fight, that I should resist. Yet resistance was meaningless. The town had already claimed me in ways I could not see, tethered me to its eternal night. As I sat in the snow, exhausted and shivering, the shadow appeared one last time that night, gliding silently across the square. It paused, extended a finger, and traced the outline of the clock tower. In that gesture, I understood the truth. Hollow Pines was not merely cursed, it was deliberate. Its malevolent intelligence orchestrated the suffering, the endless anticipation, the impossibility of mourning, and I, a visitor foolish enough to enter its streets, was now part of its eternal performance. I realized that this was the town's nature, to trap, to watch, to sustain itself on the torment of those who dared to step inside. And as the sky remained a bruised, frozen gray, I knew there was no dawn, no gift, no resolution. Christmas morning would never come here. Not for the children, not for the hollow-eyed townspeople, and certainly not for me. By the third cycle of this never-ending night, I had begun to understand that Hollow Pines was not merely a town, it was a predator. Every street I walked, every alley I tried to navigate seemed to fold in on itself, reshaping to guide me toward the square and the frozen clock tower. My sense of direction had long abandoned me, replaced by a gnawing fear that the town itself had awareness and intent. The air was heavy, almost tangible, carrying a scent that was at once sweet and rotten, like pine needles soaked in decay. Snow continued to fall in slow, deliberate spirals, drifting onto the empty streets with no disturbance, yet accumulating unnaturally fast. Footsteps I didn't take echoed behind me, soft at first, then louder, sometimes matching my pace exactly, sometimes anticipating it. I would turn, expecting to see a townsfolk or some spectral figure, only to find nothing, yet the sound persisted, relentless, following me like a heartbeat embedded in the night. I tried to run, to escape, but every attempt led me deeper into the labyrinth. Houses shifted imperceptibly as I passed, their windows facing me no matter which direction I turned. Doors led to walls, hallways looped back upon themselves. It was impossible. The town had become a living maze, and I was prey, hunted by something older and wiser than any human mind could grasp. It was then that I noticed them, the shadows. Unlike the hollow-eyed townspeople, these shadows moved independently. They slid across walls, snaked along the streets, and gathered in corners, watching me. At first, they were faint, barely perceptible, but over time they grew denser, almost corporeal, brushing against my skin like a chill wind with intent. My own shadow twisted unnaturally beneath me, elongating, stretching, and contorting into shapes I didn't recognize. I realized with a shiver that the town was not only sentient, but actively reshaping reality, warping the laws of physics and perception to ensnare me. Desperate for answers, I returned to the square and gazed up at the clock tower. Its hands remained frozen at 11:57. I felt a pull from the tower, magnetic and psychic, as though it were reaching into me, tugging at my consciousness. I stepped closer, and the world seemed to shimmer, the snow around me freezing mid-air, hanging in unnatural suspension. The street lamps flickered, their light bending toward the tower as if drawn to it. And then I heard the sound, faint at first, like distant bells, but growing louder, distorted, metallic, echoing through the square with a resonance that made my bones ache. The shadow appeared again, this time at the foot of the tower. Its form was humanoid, but impossibly elongated, black tendrils rippling outward like ink spilled on water. Its face, or what I assumed to be its face, was featureless, yet I felt it looking at me directly, reading my fear, anticipating my thoughts. It gestured, slow and deliberate, and the snow around me began to move in rhythm, swirling into small cyclones that mirrored the movement of the shadow. The air hummed with energy, a vibrating pulse that pressed on my skull, and I realized that the town itself, the tower, the shadows, they were all connected, functioning as extensions of the same malevolent intelligence. Panicked, I turned to flee, but the streets had shifted again. The inn which I had visited repeatedly now stood impossibly far away, a building that seemed larger and older than I remembered. I ran, but my steps were heavy, slowed by some unseen force. Each footfall echoed unnaturally, reverberating through the distorted space, guiding me like a marionette toward the tower. Hollow Pines was no longer a place. It was a trap, a living entity that fed of my terror and my attempts to escape. I noticed the townspeople again, emerging from the snowdrifts, their hollow eyes focused on me. They moved in jerky, mechanical motions, repeating the same gestures endlessly, placing candles on windowsills, arranging gifts under trees, sweeping snow from doorways. Their mouths moved, forming words I could not hear, as if the sound had been swallowed by the very air. I realized that these people were not alive in any conventional sense. They were echoes, automatons, perhaps victims of the town itself, trapped in this eternal pre-dawn Christmas, performing a ritual without comprehension or end. And then the shadow split. Multiple tendrils extended outward, snaking toward me, merging with the edges of the town itself. The buildings warped and pulsed as if breathing, and I felt a terrifying revelation. The town's structures were not mere constructions of wood and stone. They were appendages, extensions of the same malevolent intelligence that had ensnared me. I stumbled into the square, knees buckling, my chest heaving. The clock tower loomed above me, impossibly tall, its frozen hands marking 11:57 as though time had been cruelly arrested. The shadow advanced slowly, deliberately. I could hear the distorted ringing of invisible bells and the low, guttural murmurs of the townspeople blending with the wind. It was a chorus of the trapped, of the cursed, a symphony of eternal anticipation and despair. I tried to speak, to call for help, but no sound emerged. My mouth moved, but the words were absorbed by the oppressive presence around me. Then the tower seemed to pulse, a heartbeat felt more than heard, resonating with the town, with the shadows, with the unnatural sky. I realized in a moment of pure horror that the tower was the heart of Hollow Pines, the source of its power, and the town would not let me leave until it had bound me to its rhythm, its eternal night. I fell to my knees, my hands digging into the frozen snow, and I felt the shadow reach toward me. Its tendrils touched my skin, not physically, but psychically, threading into my mind, probing my memories, my fears, my identity. I screamed in my head as visions assaulted me, past Christmases with family, joys long forgotten, moments of innocence and happiness. Each memory was twisted, corrupted, injected with the same dark presence that controlled Hollow Pines. I could feel it consuming my memories, turning them into fuel to sustain its night, its eternal twilight, its ritual of anticipation. The townspeople surrounded me then, emerging from the snowdrifts in a silent procession. They formed a circle, their hollow eyes reflecting the darkness of the tower, and began to move in unison, hands extended, gestures repeated endlessly, their presence a psychic pressure that made my vision blur. The shadow loomed above me, descending from the tower in a form that defied geometry, its edges flowing into the snow, into the buildings, into me. I understood then the nature of Hollow Pines. It did not kill, not in the conventional sense. It trapped. It consumed awareness, tethered minds to its rhythm, and turned those trapped into part of the machinery of its eternal night. Christmas morning never came here because the town required eternal anticipation, a perpetual state of hope twisted into despair. And I, helpless, terrified, exposed, was about to join the cycle. The shadow extended a tendril, brushing against my forehead, and my mind screamed. I felt my memories of other Christmases stretch and warp, bending into the town's rhythm. The townspeople's motions became synchronized with my thoughts, with my heartbeat, with my panic. I realized that I could fight, but my resistance only tightened the town's grip, accelerating the pulse of the tower, the beat of the snow, the rhythm of the shadows. And then I was lifted, no, drawn into the center of the square. The snow swirled violently, forming a vortex that rose toward the clock tower. The townspeople's motions accelerated, a chorus of the trapped, their hollow eyes reflecting the distorted sky. The shadow descended fully, wrapping its tendrils around the edges of the square, around me, and into my consciousness. Panic, despair, and fear surged through me like electricity, and I realized I was becoming part of Hollow Pines itself. The tower pulsed again, the bells rang invisibly, and the town breathed in unison. I screamed, and for a fleeting moment, I glimpsed what awaited all those who were trapped here. Eternal repetition, a life without mourning, a consciousness enslaved to anticipation, to ritual, to the eternal heartbeat of the town. And as I felt myself tethered, bound, absorbed into the dark rhythm of Hollow Pines, I knew with absolute certainty that escape was impossible. Christmas morning would never come. Not for me, not for the town, and not for anyone foolish enough to set foot in Hollow Pines. By the fourth cycle of this endless night, I had lost all sense of reality. The streets of Hollow Pines no longer obeyed any physical logic, bending and folding as if the town itself were breathing, alive, and conscious. Every corner I turned brought me back to the square, to the clock tower, to the oppressive presence of the shadow that had ensnared me in the first hours of my arrival. My hands shook uncontrollably, and my breath came in ragged bursts, visible in the icy air that seemed unnaturally thick. The clock tower loomed above me, impossibly tall, its frozen hands marking 11:57 as always. Yet tonight it felt different. The pulse emanating from it had grown stronger, synchronized with my heartbeat in a way that made me feel like an extension of the tower itself. The air vibrated with a deep, resonant hum, and the snow swirled violently around me, forming cyclones that stretched impossibly high into the sky. I could feel every tendril of the shadow probing my mind, testing my resolve, pressing at my memories and fears until they felt like fragile glass, ready to shatter. The townspeople emerged once more, a silent procession of hollow-eyed figures. But now they were closer, circling me, their hands outstretched, their motions synchronized with an unseen rhythm. Their mouths moved, forming words I could not hear, and yet I understood their meaning perfectly. Resistance was futile. The town was alive, aware, deliberate, and I was its prey, its next tethered soul, its next participant in the endless Christmas Eve. I tried to run, yet the streets no longer existed as I remembered them. Buildings shifted around me, alleys twisted into impossible angles, and doors led only to walls. Hollow Pines was no longer a town, it was a labyrinth designed to trap consciousness, to bend perception, to erase hope. Every attempt to flee fed the town's power, strengthened its pulse, and made the shadows tighter, more invasive. I realized then that I had been lured here deliberately, my mind mapped and cataloged for the purpose of sustaining this cursed place. Desperate, I approached the base of the clock tower. Its door, impossibly tall and made of warped wood, vibrated as though alive. I pressed my hand against it, and the air thrummed, resonating with my very thoughts. The shadow descended fully, wrapping around the tower like black smoke, its tendrils snaking outward, connecting the square, the snow, the townspeople, and me. I understood with a bone-deep certainty. This was the heart of Hollow Pines. The tower was not a mere structure, it was a conduit, a central organ through which the town pulsed, fed, and maintained its endless night. I forced the massive door open and stepped inside. The interior was impossibly vast, larger than the tower's exterior suggested, a cathedral of darkness filled with floating snowflakes frozen mid-air. The walls pulsed as if they were alive, the wood bending subtly, breathing, shaping itself in response to my presence. At the center of the chamber was the source of the town's power, a swirling, dark vortex of snow, shadow, and distorted light. From it emanated the heartbeat, the pulse that had synchronized with mine, the rhythm that had bound me to Hollow Pines. The shadow moved to meet me, its featureless form flowing and shifting like liquid ink. Tendrils extended from the vortex, reaching into me, threading into my mind, and I screamed as memories, fears, and desires were pulled outward, twisted, and reshaped into the town's rhythm. I felt my identity splintering, my consciousness bending to the will of the place. Resistance was impossible, yet instinct screamed at me to fight, to claw back fragments of myself from the encroaching darkness. The vortex pulsed violently, sending waves of psychic energy crashing against me. Through the chaos, I glimpsed the truth of the town. It was eternal, ancient, deliberately crafted to trap the curious and the wandering. Hollow Pines did not kill in the conventional sense. It consumed awareness, tethering minds to its rhythm and sustaining its endless night with the hope and fear of its victims. The townspeople, the shadows, the frozen Christmas trees, the looping children, they were all manifestations of the town's power, echoes of those who had been claimed before me. I saw visions then, travelers from decades past, drawn in by curiosity or accident, wandering the streets, circling the square, tethered to the town's pulse. Their faces were pale, hollow, their eyes reflecting the same emptiness I now felt creeping into mine. Some tried to resist, clawing at doors, running down twisting alleys, screaming silently. Others had surrendered, their consciousness folded into the town, their memories feeding the endless Christmas Eve, ensuring that morning would never come. And now I understood that I was next. A cold wave swept through the chamber, and I was thrown to my knees. The shadow extended a tendril, brushing against my forehead, and my mind screamed as it pulled at the core of my being. I felt my memories of past Christmases warp, bending into the town's rhythm, corrupted by the pulse of the vortex. I could see my family, my childhood homes, moments of joy and hope, all twisting into grotesque reflections, repeating endlessly in the darkness. Panic surged through me, yet I knew that it was feeding the town, making me more connected, more bound. I attempted to strike the shadow, to push back against its probing tendrils, but my hands passed through it like smoke. Each attempt only accelerated the pulsing of the vortex, each motion feeding the heartbeat of Hollow Pines. I realized then that confrontation was useless. The town was not a force to be fought with fists or logic. It was eternal, deliberate, conscious, and I was a part of its design. Desperation drove me to the center of the chamber. I pressed myself against the vortex, trying to resist the pull, to cling to fragments of my humanity. The air shimmered, snowflakes spinning in impossible patterns, shadows crawling along the walls and ceiling, reaching towards me, binding me. The heartbeat grew louder, resonant in my chest, and I understood that surrender was inevitable. My consciousness would be folded, tethered to the rhythm, added to the town's machinery. The vortex pulsed one final time, and I felt myself slipping into its orbit, my mind bending, identity fracturing. Yet, even as the darkness threatened to consume me entirely, a thought, fleeting and desperate, passed through me. Maybe there was a flaw, a crack, a chance to escape. But the town sensed it instantly. The vortex pulsed violently, waves of psychic energy washing over me, disintegrating hope into despair. The shadows recoiled from nothing, flowing through me, merging with my thoughts, twisting them. I realized with crushing certainty that Hollow Pines did not allow mistakes. Escape was an illusion. Mourning was an illusion. Freedom was an illusion. The chamber spun around me, snow and shadow blending into an eternal twilight. I screamed, a sound swallowed by the pulse of the town, absorbed, twisted, feeding the very force that sought to claim me. The vortex expanded, engulfing me, tendrils threading into my mind, my memories, my very soul. Resistance was meaningless, submission was inevitable. And as I felt my consciousness begin to fray, merging with the rhythm of Hollow Pines, I understood the town's cruel perfection. Christmas morning would never come, because hope was a resource to be consumed, and I was its newest offering. By the time I awoke, or whatever could be called awakening in Hollow Pines, the town had fully claimed me. My mind felt stretched thin, tethered to the rhythm of the square, to the pulse of the frozen clock tower. I could feel the heartbeat of the town running through my veins, synchronizing with my thoughts, my memories, even my breath. I was both here and not here, my consciousness entwined with the snow, the shadows, the endless looping streets. The square lay before me, unchanged yet impossibly vast. The clock tower loomed as it always had, its hands frozen at 11:57. The townspeople were performing their motions again, placing gifts under trees, sweeping snow, arranging lights. Their hollow eyes fixed on the task, never aware of the passage of time, never aware of me, or perhaps fully aware, yet indifferent. I realized with a dread that froze me from the inside out that I too had become part of them. My own hands moved involuntarily, mimicking the gestures of the town's automatons. My lips whispered words I did not intend, words absorbed into the town's endless chorus. I tried to resist, to reclaim fragments of my identity, but the shadows were everywhere, crawling along the buildings, the snow, the edges of my perception. Tendrils of dark energy had wrapped around my consciousness, pulling memories from me and folding them into the town's rhythm. I saw flashes, my childhood, past Christmases, loved ones I would never see again, warped and twisted into grotesque reflections, looping endlessly. Every moment of hope was converted into sustenance for Hollow Pines, feeding its eternal night. Desperation surged, but resistance had become a memory. My feet carried me back to the square, circling endlessly, guided by the invisible pulse of the clock tower. The snow whirled around me, forming impossible spirals, freezing mid-air, suspended in the town's heartbeat. The shadow hovered above, featureless, omnipresent, watching, ensuring compliance. My voice joined the chorus of whispers. My eyes reflected the void of the townspeople's hollow stares. I understood fully now. I was trapped, not merely in place, but in consciousness, in identity, in time itself. The clock tower pulsed again, a deep, resonant vibration that shook through every fiber of my being. The town breathed in unison with it, its structures flexing subtly, its streets bending, guiding, reshaping. I realized that the town itself was alive, a sentient entity older than any memory, existing to sustain itself through the endless repetition of anticipation. Christmas morning would never come because the town fed on hope frozen in eternal expectation, and I was now part of its machinery. Figures emerged from the edges of the square, children playing in loops, laughter hollow yet incessant, adults arranging decorations endlessly, faces pale and blank, shadows crawling along the buildings, the snow, the edges of my perception. Tendrils of dark energy had wrapped around my consciousness, pulling memories from me and folding them into the town's rhythm. I saw flashes, my childhood, past Christmases, loved ones I would never see again, warped and twisted into grotesque reflections, looping endlessly. Every moment of hope was converted into sustenance for hollow pines, feeding its eternal night. Desperation surged, but resistance had become a memory. My feet carried me back to the square, circling endlessly, guided by the invisible pulse of the clock tower. The snow whirled around me, forming impossible spirals, freezing mid-air, suspended in the town's heartbeat. The shadow hovered above, featureless, omnipresent, watching, ensuring compliance. My voice joined the chorus of whispers. My eyes reflected the void of the townspeople's hollow stares. I understood fully now. I was trapped, not merely in place, but in consciousness, in identity, in time itself. The clock tower pulsed again, a deep, resonant vibration that shook through every fiber of my being. The town breathed in unison with it, its structures flexing subtly, its streets bending, guiding, reshaping. I realized that the town itself was alive, a sentient entity older than any memory, existing to sustain itself through the endless repetition of anticipation. Christmas morning would never come because the town fed on hope frozen in eternal expectation, and I was now part of its machinery. Figures emerged from the edges of the square, children playing in loops, laughter hollow yet incessant, adults arranging decorations endlessly, faces pale and blank, shadows crawling along the walls and rooftops, writhing, alive. They converged around me, forming a circle that pulsed in time with the heartbeat of the tower. I felt the pulse in my chest, in my head, in the marrow of my bones. The town did not merely trap bodies, it trapped essence, weaving consciousness into the rhythm, binding mind and memory to its eternal night. I attempted to speak, to cry out, but no words came. My voice had become another instrument, part of the town's chorus, feeding its pulse. The vortex at the heart of the tower shimmered, swirling, expanding, drawing the essence of every trapped soul into its orbit. I glimpsed the others who had come before me, travelers and innocents, their consciousness folded, bound, lost, yet sustaining the rhythm that kept the town alive. And I understood then that there was no salvation, no rescue, no mourning. The shadow descended, its tendrils threading into my mind, probing, testing, consuming. Memories, hopes, fragments of identity were drawn into it, folded into the eternal cycle. Resistance was impossible. I felt myself unravel, my perception bending to the town's will. My hands continued to move, placing imaginary gifts, adjusting invisible lights, performing the endless gestures of Christmas Eve. The pulse of the clock tower had become my heartbeat. The town had become my mind. I looked toward the sky, or what I remembered as the sky, gray, frozen, heavy, unchanging. Snow fell in deliberate spirals, and the wind carried the faint echo of bells that would never toll for morning. I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how I moved, the night would never end. Hollow pines had claimed me fully. The town's malevolent intelligence had woven me into its fabric. I was trapped in the ritual, bound to the pulse,
a part of the machinery that ensured Christmas morning would never come. A fleeting thought passed me, a memory of hope, of warmth, of sunrise, but it was swallowed instantly, absorbed, folded into the rhythm, corrupted, feeding the town's hunger. I tried to resist again, but the shadow's tendrils were everywhere, wrapping not around my body, but my very consciousness, threading through every thought. My identity fractured further, slipping into the collective pulse of hollow pines. I was no longer alone. I was part of the town, and yet I was lost within it. The square pulsed, the vortex shimmered, the shadows moved, and the hollow-eyed townspeople continued their endless motions. My mind screamed silently, a whisper among thousands, joining the chorus, feeding the heartbeat of the town. I felt my essence blend with the darkness, my memories feeding the eternal loop of anticipation, my consciousness tethered to the pulse of the tower. Christmas morning would never come, not for me, not for the town, and certainly not for anyone foolish enough to enter Hollow Pines. And as the eternal night stretched on, the snow swirling endlessly, the shadows crawling, the town breathing in unison with the heartbeat of the clock tower, I understood the cruel perfection of Hollow Pines. It was eternal, self-sustaining, and patient. It waited for the curious, the wandering, the hopeful, and it claimed them in silence, folding their minds into its rhythm. And I, like all before me, had become part of the town. My consciousness, my identity, my very soul now pulsed with Hollow Pines, a participant in its endless ritual of anticipation. Forever, I would circle the square, perform the gestures, feel the heartbeat, and wait for a morning that would never come. And outside, the snow continued to fall.